In the fall of 1984, beneath the wide Texas sky, a father and his bright-orange daughter vanished without a trace during what was supposed to be an ordinary weekend road trip. They left behind more than just an empty driveway. They left a chasm in the heart of a family. Back in Austin, Margaret Holbrook was left clutching the kind of grief that never fades, only deepens with time. For 16 years, her life had become a ritual of waiting, haunted by memories, suspended in a state of limbo. Then, one quiet afternoon, everything changed. The golden autumn sunlight slanted through the lace curtains of Margaret's modest living room, casting soft streaks across the wooden floor like echoes of memories. She sat on a faded floral couch, holding the television remote as if it were an anchor. Her fingers, pale and tense, curled around it in quiet desperation. Beside her, her elderly mother, Doris, mirrored the same expression of breathless anticipation, a look they both wore every year on this painful and "It's almost time," Margaret murmured, her voice barely more than a hush as she turned up the volume. The screen flickered to life with the glow of a local newscast. Margaret leaned forward, as if trying to bridge the impossible distance between herself and the faces on the screen. For 16 years, she had arranged for this very segment to air, her personal plea wrapped in polished news graphics, beamed across living rooms in the hope that someone, somewhere, still remembered. The familiar family photograph appeared. A man with kind eyes and a thick, well-kept mustache stood next to a little girl, beaming with all the innocence the world could offer. To the side, a pristine red 1979 Cadillac DeVille gleamed beneath the Texas sun. 16 years ago today, Jim Holbrook and his 8-year-old daughter, Lucia, disappeared without a trace, the announcer said solemnly. Last seen traveling south on Route 183 in a red Cadillac DeVille, license plate THB 143. If you have any information, please contact the Austin Police Department. Margaret clicked off the television. The silence that followed felt louder than the report itself, its weight pressing into the room like a storm cloud. She glanced at her mother. Doris's face was carved with years of sorrow, her lips tight with old pain. "I'll go upstairs to freshen up," Doris said, squeezing her daughter's hand with fragile reassurance. As Doris slowly ascended the stairs, Margaret drifted toward the bookshelf in the corner, where time had stilled. Her fingers paused on a weathered leather-bound photo album. She opened it as if it were scripture. The images within had grown familiar over the years, yet they still struck like a blade. Jim proudly posing next to the Cadillac he'd worked overtime to afford, Lucia in her first day of school dress, the three of them smiling at Barton Springs. Every page whispered, "You had it all." And then it was gone. Her fingers trembled as they traced Lucia's tiny face. "Where are you?" she whispered. It was a prayer she had spoken into the silence 1,000 times. Then the phone rang. It pierced the stillness with a shrill urgency. Margaret, startled, closed the album and made her way to the kitchen phone. "Hello?" she asked, breathless. "Mrs. Holbrook, this is Officer Daniels with the Austin Police Department," the voice replied. "We've just received a report of potential evidence discovered at a junkyard in San Marcos. It might be connected to your husband and daughter's case." Margaret felt her knees buckle. She gripped the counter. "What kind of evidence?" she asked, her voice barely steady. "I'm afraid we can't go into details over the phone, ma'am, but we'd appreciate it if you could come down to identify what's been found. We can send a patrol car within 10 minutes. "Yes," she said instantly. "Yes, I'll be ready." She hung up the phone and turned toward the stairs, her voice rising with a strange mix of fear and fragile hope. "Mom," she called out. "The police found something at a junkyard in San Marcos. They think it might be connected to Jim and Lucia." Doris reappeared at the top of the stairs. Her face had gone pale, and for a moment she didn't speak. "What did they find?" she finally asked, her voice hollow. "They didn't say. But they're sending a car. And coming with you," Doris said, already making her way down, her age momentarily eclipsed by urgency. The two women waited in silence, their thoughts tangled in memories and unanswered questions. When the patrol car pulled into the driveway, Margaret opened the door to a young officer who introduced himself as Officer Martinez. He offered little beyond a polite nod as they began the hour-long drive south. The Texas landscape blurred outside the window. Mesquite trees, sun-bleached roads, and distant hills, none of it registering. Margaret's mind raced. Every scenario flashed through her head. Remains, the car, some item of clothing, or worse, nothing at all. Beside her, Doris sat upright, her hands locked together in her lap like a rosary. When they arrived at Harrow's Auto Salvage, Margaret's breath caught at the sight of yellow police tape and a line of cruisers. Something had been found, and whatever it was, it had reopened a wound that had never truly closed. Officer Martinez led them through a labyrinth of rusted steel and broken glass. At the far end, a small group of officers and detectives stood clustered around something she couldn't yet see. "Detective Reyes," Martinez called out. "Mrs. Holbrook and her mother are here." A tall man in plain clothes turned toward them, his face unreadable. Whatever lay ahead was going to change everything. "Mrs. Holbrook, Mrs. Barrett," the detective began, his voice even but laced with gravity. "I'm Detective Reyes. Thank you for coming so quickly." Margaret nodded once, her eyes already scanning the yard behind him. "What did you find?" she asked, her tone steady, though her hands betrayed her, trembling at her sides, clenched in a losing battle against hope and dread. Detective Reyes stepped aside. And then Margaret saw it. Time seemed to warp as her eyes locked onto the mangled remains behind the crowd of officers. Her breath caught, her knees buckled slightly, and for a moment the world narrowed to a crushing silence. There it was, or what was left of it, a red Cadillac DeVille. Its iconic lines now twisted and partially crushed under the weight of rust, decay, and time. The once glossy paint was dulled to a sickly, blistered red-brown, but even after 16 years, she knew there was no mistaking it. This was Jim's car. The same car he had proudly parked in their driveway. The car he had waxed every Sunday afternoon like a prized possession. The car he had driven away in, with their daughter. Beside her, Doris gripped her arm tightly. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice breaking. Margaret moved forward as if in a trance, her steps mechanical, her soul years behind. The police were swarming around the wreckage, photographing it from every angle, collecting samples, measuring, documenting. But to her, it was still his car, the last thing she had ever seen of him. Detective Reyes spoke again, gently. "We haven't been able to access the interior due to the damage, but we need confirmation. Is this your husband's vehicle?" Margaret circled the car slowly, her gaze tracing over the corroded metal and shattered glass. Her breath became shallow. She stopped suddenly, crouched beside what remained of the right rear wheel and pointed with a trembling hand. "There," she said softly. "That dent. Jim hit a curb the week before they disappeared. We were going to fix it, but—" Her words faded, swallowed by emotion. She looked up, eyes filled with tears she had long forbidden herself to shed. "Yes," she said. "This was their car." Detective Reyes gave a somber nod, then gestured to a man hovering at the edge of the scene, a man with grease on his jeans and guilt written all over his face. "This is Dean Lamb, the junkyard's owner. He's the one who made the call." Dean stepped forward, wiping his hands on a rag before hesitantly extending one. I'm so sorry, ma'am. I had no idea what that car meant. I swear it was on the list to be crushed this morning. Then I went back to my office and caught the news segment. I saw the photo, and I recognized it, called you guys right away." Margaret ignored his hand. Her voice came out, tight. "How did it get here? Who brought it in? Dean's face clouded with discomfort. That's the strange part, ma'am. We have no record of it being brought in. It's not in our system at all. Doris stiffened beside her. That sounds suspicious, she snapped. Detective Reyes lifted a hand calmly. Mr. Lamb was the one who alerted us, Mrs. Barrett. There's no indication he's involved, but we're investigating further. Dean added, we have strict intake protocols, paperwork, IDs, everything. I've been scratching my head all morning. At that moment, a young woman in greasy overalls approached, wiping her hands on a towel. I saw Reed bring it in, she said flatly. All eyes snapped to her. Reed? Reyes asked. Dean nodded. Reed Caraway, my business partner. He handles the tech side, supervises incoming vehicles. Reyes pulled out his phone. We need to speak with him. Can you call him? Dean dialed quickly. After a few tense moments, he shook his head. No answer. I'll need his home address, Reyes said firmly. Dean handed him a small slip of paper. South Austin. This is it. Reyes turned to an officer. Send a unit to this address. Bring Mr. Caraway in for questioning. Now. He turned back to Dean. Anything else of Reed's on the premises that might be important? His office, Dean replied. But it's locked. Only Reed has the key. We'll need a warrant, Reyes said, signaling to another officer. Get the paperwork started. Meanwhile, Margaret remained frozen. Her eyes never left the destroyed Cadillac. 16 years of anguish and unanswered prayers led to this moment. The past, now rusting in front of her, had been unearthed, but Jim and Lucia were still missing. Start searching the area, Reyes instructed. Mrs. Halbrook, Mrs. Barrett, if you feel up to it, your help in identifying any personal belongings could be invaluable. They nodded wordlessly, and the hours that followed felt both eternal and fleeting. Officers combed through twisted piles of metal, old seats, half-shattered windshields, but nothing, no toys, no clothes, no personal artifacts, surfaced. As the sun climbed toward its peak, they gathered outside the locked office, awaiting Reed or the warrant. Margaret leaned against the wall. The toll of the day etched deep into her features. Doris wrapped a comforting arm around her shoulders. Neither spoke. There was nothing left to say. Then came the sound of tires crunching gravel. 2 patrol cars and a dark blue pickup truck pulled into the yard. A man in his mid-20s stepped out. Work boots, short brown hair, a stained uniform with the junkyard logo stitched into the breast pocket. He looked confused but alert. Ray stepped forward. Mr. Caraway? The young man nodded. Yeah, that's me. You said it was urgent? I'm Detective Reyes. We're investigating the appearance of a red Cadillac here, one tied to a 16-year-old missing persons case. Reed's face paled slightly. The car that got crushed? I heard Dean called you. Reyes gestured toward Margaret and Doris. This is Margaret Halbrook and her mother, Doris Barrett. The Cadillac belonged to her husband, who disappeared with their daughter. Reed swallowed hard. I'm really sorry to hear that. He extended his hand. After a pause, Margaret took it. The car wasn't logged, Reyes continued. A co-worker said she saw you bring it in. Can you explain how you got it? Reed ran a hand through his hair. Yeah, about a week ago. This older guy pulls in while Dean's out, says he wants the car destroyed, doesn't need it anymore. He paid in cash, a lot of it. Name? Reyes asked. No, Reed replied. That's what was weird. I tried to get info, but he just took off, left the keys in the ignition and walked away. I called out, chased him a bit, but he was gone. Reyes leaned in. Can you describe him? Reed's brow furrowed in thought. Tall, maybe 6 foot, thin, gray hair, but it used to be dark, I think. Mustache, thick one. Glasses. Wore khaki pants and a button-up. talked real soft, barely audible. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. That sounds like Jim," she whispered. Doris turned sharply. "What?" she said, too loudly, her voice a mix of disbelief and fear. "But that's impossible." And yet in that moment the past wasn't as far away as it had seemed. Detective Reyes turned toward Margaret, his voice calm but sharpened by the tension in the air. "Mrs. Hellbrook, are you saying this description sounds like your husband?" Margaret hesitated, then nodded slowly, her eyes unfocused as if trying to hold on to a ghost. "The height, the build, the mustache. Jim always wore button-ups, even on weekends. It could be him." Reyes turned back to Reed. "Roughly how old was the man?" Reed shrugged, uncertain. "Hard to tell. Maybe in his 50s. Could have been younger. He looked worn down, like someone who's lived through hard years." Doris shook her head sharply, her voice rising with disbelief. "It doesn't make sense. Jim loved that car. He worked overtime to buy it. Why would he get rid of it now? And why not sooner?" 16 years, Margaret added, her voice growing firmer. 16 years of nothing. Why now? And where's Lucia? Reyes raised his hand in a calming gesture. "Let's not jump ahead. These are questions we need to answer, but we'll need to investigate every angle." He turned back to Reed. "We'd like to take a look at your office. One of your co-workers mentioned it's locked." "Yeah, of course," Reed said, reaching for his keys. "There's nothing to hide. Just tools, parts, catalogs, stuff like that." As they made their way across the gravel path toward the office building, Margaret and Doris walked side by side, glancing at each other with expressions lined by years of emotional fatigue. "Do you really think it could have been Jim?" Doris whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know," Margaret replied honestly. "It sounds like him, but if it is, why would he abandon the car? Why now? Where has he been all this time? And why? Where's Lucia?" Her voice cracked. "I don't believe Jim would do that." "Maybe someone's trying to throw us off," Doris said, trying to cling to logic. "Maybe it's not what it seems." At the office door, Reed fumbled with a ring of keys before unlocking it and stepping back. "Go ahead," he said. "Please wait outside," Reyes instructed gently. "We'll let you know if we find anything of interest." As the officers filed into the dim office, Doris suddenly gasped. Her hand clutched her chest, her body trembling. "Mom?" Margaret said, alarmed. "What's wrong?" "My asthma," Doris wheezed, struggling to find her inhaler. "The stress." Margaret helped her mother to a nearby bench and rummaged through the purse. Finding the inhaler, she handed it over, watching closely as Doris slowly regained control of her breathing. "I'm fine," Doris insisted after a few moments, though her face remained colorless. "Just overwhelmed." "I'm sorry." Detective Reyes knelt beside her. "Would you like us to call an ambulance?" Doris shook her head firmly. No, I'll be okay. I just need a moment." While Margaret sat beside her mother, the investigation continued behind the office door. Occasionally an officer emerged with something, a scrap of fabric, a tool, a paper with writing, but each time Margaret shook her head. None of it belonged to Jim. None of it belonged to Lucia. After nearly an hour, Reyes emerged from the office, looking disappointed but composed. "We've finished our search," he told them. "Unfortunately, there's nothing we can link directly to your husband or daughter." Margaret's shoulders sank, the emotional weight too heavy to bear. "So we're no closer to the truth?" she asked, her voice barely holding. "We've made progress," Reyes replied gently. "Finding the car is a breakthrough. It gives us something concrete. Now we need to trace who brought it here and why." He turned to Reed. "Mr. Carraway, we'd like you to come to the station to provide a formal statement." Of course, Reed said. I want to help however I can. Reyes turned back to the women. We'd appreciate it if you came too. We'll review the case file with fresh eyes, see if anything new jumps out. We'll come, Margaret said without hesitation. I'll drive myself, Reed added. I was heading back to Austin anyway. Reyes studied him for a second before nodding. Fine, be there within the hour. As they made their way back to the waiting cruiser, Margaret helped Doris along, still shaky from the asthma attack. Are you sure you're up for this? She asked, worry creeping back into her voice. Doris looked her daughter in the eye, firm and resolute. If there's even a whisper of truth waiting at the end of this, I need to be there. I need to know. They slid into the back of the cruiser while Reed climbed into his truck. The convoy pulled away from the junkyard, the sun now blazing at its zenith, casting sharp shadows across the crushed red Cadillac, once a symbol of joy, now a grim relic of vanished lives. At the Austin Police Department, under harsh fluorescent lights, Margaret and Doris sat in a small conference room, directly across from Detective Reyes and another officer. The atmosphere was heavy with exhaustion and history. Let's go through the timeline again, Reyes said, opening a thick case folder. Sometimes, something old looks different through new eyes. Margaret nodded slowly, her hands folded tightly on the table. Jim and Lucia left on the morning of Saturday, October 12, 1984. Jim ran a dental practice, built it from the ground up. He was loved, respected. He had this style about him. Mustache, colorful ties, always polished. Patients adored him. And Lucia? The second officer asked gently. Margaret's eyes softened with memory. She was 8, curious, bubbly. She followed her dad like a shadow. She adored him. You didn't go with them? The officer asked, scribbling notes. No, Mom needed help that weekend. She was rearranging the house after Dad passed. It was just supposed to be an overnight trip. Jim wanted to show Lucia the leaves in the hill country, maybe take her to Enchanted Rock. They were supposed to be back Sunday evening. When did you know something was wrong? Reyes asked, though he already knew. Sunday night, Margaret said. Jim always called. When I didn't hear from him by dinner, I called the motel. They'd checked out that morning. I called everyone, friends, family. Nobody had seen them. By Monday, I called the police. Doris reached out and gripped Margaret's hand. We've been searching ever since, she said softly. Reyes nodded. Back then, we followed every lead. We checked gas stations, interviewed motel staff, scoured the area. No bank activity, no phone calls, his practice untouched. Technology was limited, the second officer added. No cell phones, fewer cameras. We did everything we could. And now, Margaret said, voice tight. His car shows up in a junkyard. Brought in by a man who might be Jim. A heavy silence blanketed the room. Reyes closed the file and leaned forward, choosing his words carefully. Mrs. Halbrook, I need to ask, do you believe it's possible your husband left voluntarily? Margaret stiffened. No, absolutely not. We were happy. He loved Lucia. His career was flourishing. There was no reason to run. Sometimes people have secrets, Reyes said gently. Parts of themselves they hide, even from those closest to them. Not Jim, she said, and even if he had secrets, he would never take Lucia. Never. Just then the door opened and a female officer stepped in. Reed Carraway's statement has been processed. He's waiting in the lobby. Reyes nodded. Thank you. He turned to Margaret and Doris. We'll continue this investigation. The car will be fully examined, and we'll dig into how it got here. I recommend you both get some rest. It's been a long day. Margaret checked her watch. It was past 2 p.m. Time had become meaningless. Yes, she said quietly. We should. We can have someone drive you, Reyes offered. In the lobby, Reed sat scrolling through his phone. He stood when they approached. Well done? He asked. Yes, Margaret replied. Thank you for your help. Reyes nodded. We'll be in touch, Mr. Carraway. And with that, the mystery deepened. Reed turned toward the women, offering a polite smile. I can give you both a ride if you'd like. I live in Hyde Park. Detective Reyes looked up sharply, a hint of hesitation flashing in his eyes. That's not necessary, Mr. Carraway. We can arrange for... But before he could finish, a uniformed officer approached him with urgent news. The detective excused himself, drawn away in a quiet, intense exchange. Margaret looked at her mother, whose eyes were weary and half-lidded from the stress of the day. The idea of waiting another hour for a police escort or dealing with a taxi didn't feel practical. And Reed had been cooperative. They knew where he worked. They had his license plate. Her instincts weren't screaming, but they did stir faintly. Still, practicality won out. We'd appreciate the ride, Margaret said quietly, silencing the subtle churn in her gut. I'll let Detective Reyes know. Doris leaned closer, her voice a hoarse whisper. Are you sure about this? They have all his information. It'll be fine, Margaret replied, hoping she believed it. When Reyes returned, Margaret informed him of their choice. He didn't argue, but his body language said enough. I've got his plate and full contact info, he told them. Call me at once if anything feels off. Outside, Reed's old pickup truck was waiting, dented but clean. The interior smelled faintly of grease and pine-scented air freshener. He helped Doris into the cab with surprising gentleness, then stepped aside for Margaret to climb into the middle seat. So, where in Hyde Park? He asked as he started the engine. Speedway, near 45th, Margaret answered, her tone neutral. I'm on Avenue H, just around the corner. Funny we've never run into each other. Thank you again for the ride, she said softly. The afternoon sun filtered through the windshield as they drove north through Austin's quieter neighborhoods. Reed kept conversation light, commenting on how the city had changed, the new apartments going up, the old diners disappearing. It would have been pleasant, if not for the undercurrent of unease Margaret couldn't shake. Suddenly, Doris tensed beside her, patting her purse, alarm in her voice. Oh no. What's wrong, Mom? My inhaler, Doris said. I think I left it at the junkyard office during the attack. Margaret's concern deepened. Are you feeling okay? I'm fine now, but I need that inhaler. It's the new prescription. Just got it last week. Cost me a fortune. I've got asthma too, Reed chimed in. I've got a spare at home if you need it. That's kind of you, Margaret said, but we could stop at a pharmacy. I don't want to waste money on another one, Doris interrupted. It's probably just sitting on the desk at the junkyard. Margaret hesitated. Mom, it's an hour back. I don't mind, Reed said smoothly. Honestly, it's not a problem. I go there almost daily. We can be back before dinner. Margaret studied her mother's determined face. Are you sure? I am. That's my inhaler. Reed signaled and turned the truck around. All right then, back to San Marcos. As the sun crept lower in the sky, they arrived at Auto Salvage Junkyard. The crime scene tape still cordoned off the crushed Cadillac like a ghost of the past. A few workers moved through the lot, reorganizing parts as if today hadn't unearthed a mystery that could break wide open. Inside the office, Dean looked surprised. Back again? He asked. Thought the police took you home. We did, Reed explained, but Mrs. Barrett thinks she left her inhaler here. Dean nodded. Ah, I found it after everyone left. I put it in your office for safekeeping. Would you mind if I got it now? Doris asked. It's my prescription. Of course, Dean said. Reed's got the key. Reed led them down the familiar hallway. Margaret sat down outside the office, fatigue pressing into her bones. Doris stood, arms crossed, her eyes sharp and sweeping, never quite still. Reed unlocked the door and stepped inside. A long minute passed. Then another. Margaret glanced up. "What's taking him so long?" Doris leaned close, her eyes wide. "Margaret, when Reed opens that door, look inside. On the top shelf of the glass cabinet, I think I saw a handbag. Blue, between some books. It looks like Lucia's." Margaret's heart dropped. "That's impossible, Mom," she whispered. "Lucia had it with her when she vanished." "I know, but just look," Doris urged. "Same size, same shade." Footsteps echoed. The door opened. Both women instinctively looked past Reed into the office, and there, clear as day, sat a small blue handbag. Rectangular, white trim, a simple clasp. It sat between mechanical manuals and old parts catalogs, like it had always belonged there. Reed stepped out, inhaler in hand. "Found it," he said, offering it to Doris. But Margaret wasn't looking at the inhaler. Her eyes were locked on that bag. "Reed," she said carefully, "that blue bag in your office, it looks like my daughter's, the one she had with her when she disappeared." Reed froze, just slightly. His face didn't change, but his shoulders tightened. "Oh, that," he said, voice breezy. "Old thing. Belonged to my daughter." Dean looked up from the counter. "I didn't know you had a daughter." Reed's smile didn't reach his eyes. "She lives with her mom, in Houston." "Would you mind if I took a closer look?" Margaret asked, already rising. Reed hesitated, then unlocked the door again. "Sure, it's nothing special." Inside, he reached up and handed the bag to Margaret. "My daughter wasn't into girly stuff," he explained. "Got this from school for her birthday, never used it." Margaret took the bag gently, reverently. Her fingers traced its seams. Same shape, same weight, same stitching she remembered from 1984. Lucia had begged for it, saved weeks of allowance for it. She'd carried it everywhere. "This looks vintage," Margaret said. "What year did your daughter get it?" Reed shifted his stance. "Not sure. Few years back." Doris stepped closer. "It's identical to a style from the early 80s, she said, watching his expression. "I'm surprised they still make them." Reed gave a nonchalant shrug. "Vintage is back in, right? What's old is new again." But Margaret wasn't listening to his words. Her mind spun. The past and present were bleeding together. Something wasn't right, and they were standing right in the middle of it. Margaret slowly unfastened the clasp of the blue handbag, her hands delicate, almost reverent. The interior was empty. No tissues, no forgotten lip balm, no childhood keepsake, just the familiar lining she remembered all too well. Her fingers glided over the inside seams as though they might whisper something back to her. "It's in remarkably good condition," she murmured, "for a bag meant for a child." "As I said," Reed replied casually, "she barely used it, never really liked it. You can keep it if it brings you comfort. Been gathering dust in my office." Margaret's head snapped up. "You just give it away? Your daughter's birthday present?" Reed shrugged, his smile tight. "It's not like she misses it. And if it helps you remember your daughter, why not?" "That's very generous," Margaret said, her tone cautious. She searched his eyes, but found only a veil of unreadability. Doris, who had been examining the bag closely, suddenly turned it over. Her finger caught on something stitched inside. "There's a white ribbon tag in here," she said, frowning as she held it up to the light. "But no manufacturer info. Looks like something was printed on it once, but it's been wiped off." "Ah." Margaret leaned in. Sure enough, the tag bore the ghost of erased letters. "That's strange," she murmured, then turned back to Reed. "What kind of gift doesn't have any brand or label?" Reed's tone cooled. I wouldn't know. It was a gift from a friend at her school. Margaret touched the fabric again, the weight, the vinyl texture. It was identical to Lucia's, the one she insisted on bringing everywhere, even on that last trip. "We'll keep it," Doris announced, suddenly pressing the bag to her chest. "If it's really okay." "Like I said," Reed replied, opening the door. "It's just an old bag." They walked back toward his truck, gravel crunching underfoot. Neither Margaret nor Doris spoke until they were seated inside, and Reed stepped away to chat with Dean. "It's Lucia's bag," Doris whispered. "I'm sure of it. That tag. It was tampered with. No brand, no year." Margaret nodded, her thoughts racing. But how could he have it? And why would he lie? "First Jim's car, now Lucia's bag," Doris said, her voice tight, "and both somehow connected to Reed." Margaret swallowed, trying to steady her breath. "Let's not jump to conclusions." "Do you really believe that?" Doris asked, her voice piercing with quiet force. Reed returned, climbing into the driver's seat with a bright, unsettling cheerfulness. "All set?" he asked, as if they hadn't just uncovered something that fractured reality. "Yes," Margaret said, offering a faint smile. "Thank you for all your help." The ride back to Austin felt heavier now. The golden light outside was beautiful, almost mocking in its calmness. Margaret sat stiffly in the passenger seat, the blue bag on her lap, her hands gripping it tighter with each passing mile. Doris remained silent in the back, her inhaler now safely tucked away, her eyes fixed on the back of Reed's head. Reed broke the silence. "Must have been a real shock finding that car today." 16 years of silence, Margaret said softly. "And then, this." "Tell me about them," Reed asked. "Jim and Lucia, what were they like?" Margaret hesitated. The question felt too casual, too practiced. Still, talking about them helped her remember them as they were, not just as names on a case file. Jim was a dentist, loved working with kids, wore these awful ties with tooth patterns, made the kids laugh. "Sounds like a character," Reed chuckled. "And Lucia." Margaret's voice softened. She was curious, bright, loved fashion. She saved up for that blue bag. It was part of a Barbie collection, a limited edition. Reed nodded toward it. "She must have loved it." "She carried it everywhere," Margaret said. Then she reached into her purse, pulling out an old photo. Jim and Lucia standing in front of the red Cadillac. Jim's mustache thick, Lucia beaming in a pink rainbow shirt. This was taken a month before they vanished. Reed barely glanced before returning his focus to the road. "Nice-looking family," he said, then added, "She was missing her top 2 teeth, right? That pink rainbow shirt?" Margaret froze. She hadn't mentioned the rainbow shirt, or the missing teeth. In the back seat, Doris stiffened. "Yes," Margaret said slowly, slipping the photo back into her purse. "That's right." The rest of the ride was silent, but Margaret noticed Reed glancing at her in the rear-view mirror. Too often. Was he watching her or the handbag? When they reached Margaret's home, relief washed over her like a tide. Reed pulled up and smiled. "Here we are, safe and sound." "Thank you," Margaret said, trying to keep her voice even. "My pleasure," he replied. "If you ever need anything, I'm in the book." They exited quickly. Once Reed's truck turned the corner and disappeared, Margaret locked the door behind them. "Did you hear what he said?" Doris whispered immediately. "About the teeth, the shirt?" Margaret sank into a chair. "He couldn't have seen those things. Not from a quick glance. And I didn't mention them." "Margaret," Doris said slowly, "could he have known Jim or Lucia? Could he be hiding something?" Margaret hesitated. We don't have proof. It could be coincidence. Too many coincidences, Doris replied. Margaret looked at the handbag again. If it was Lucia's, it would have her name in it. I used to mark everything. I remember, Doris said. But she didn't want her name written in this one, so we stuck a sticker inside. Margaret examined the lining again, her fingers searching for any residue of that sticker. The bag was familiar in every way. The missing brand tag, the erased lettering. It all pointed to something not right. We need confirmation, Doris said. Let's go to the antique store. Mr. Keller will know. If this bag really is vintage, he can tell us. Margaret stood, determination taking root. Let's do it. Let's find out the truth. Moments later, they were back on the road. The late afternoon light turned everything golden, but inside the car was a storm of memory and doubt. I don't know what to believe anymore, Margaret said. If this was Lucia's, why would Reed have it? They reached Burnett Antiques just before closing. The scent of aged wood and books greeted them. The cluttered shop felt oddly comforting. Mrs. Halbrook, Mrs. Barrett, Mr. Keller greeted warmly. What a surprise. We need your help, Margaret said. With this. Doris handed over the blue handbag. Mr. Keller adjusted his glasses and examined it closely. Early 1980s. Children's accessory. Looks like a Mattel design. Could be part of the Barbie Dream collection. Margaret's breath hitched. And just like that, the past inched closer to the present. Mr. Keller turned the handbag over gently in his hands, examining it with a curiosity that held no urgency. This isn't quite my area of expertise, he admitted, but Robert is in the back. He's much better with vintage collectibles, especially anything Barbie. Moments later, he returned with a younger man in his 40s, sharp-eyed, behind wire-rimmed glasses, and carrying a quiet air of precision. This is Robert K., Mr. Keller said. His wife's a serious Barbie collector. He's our go-to for anything from that world. Robert gave a courteous nod. Let's take a look. He moved the handbag to a better-lit section of the counter, his hands moving with practiced familiarity. He didn't just glance. He studied. He examined the stitching, tested the clasp, opened the lining, and traced the interior seams with delicate intent. What specifically are you hoping to find out? He asked, looking up. We want to confirm whether this is a genuine Mattel Barbie accessory, part of a limited edition from the early 1980s, Margaret explained. And if possible, determine when it was made. Robert nodded. Let's see what we've got, then. He pulled a jeweler's loupe from his pocket and peered into the seams. His tone became more focused. The vinyl texture and this stitching pattern. Yes, that's consistent with Madeline's manufacturing standards from the early 80s. The exact blue color? Barbie World Collection, if memory serves. He examined the zipper next. This pull-tab design is textbook Mattel for that period. Reaching for his phone, he added, I want to confirm something with my wife. She's got a photographic memory for Barbie lines. As Robert stepped away to make the call, Margaret and Doris leaned close. Thinks it's real, Doris whispered, her voice caught between hope and fear. It's from the right era, Margaret replied, but that still doesn't prove it was Lucia's. When Robert returned, he wore a look of certainty. My wife confirms this bag was released during Mattel's 1983-1984 limited edition run. This shade of blue was only produced for about 8 months. He turned the bag slightly and frowned. But this is troubling. Margaret's stomach tightened. What is it? Robert pointed to the ribbon tag. This has been tampered with. See the puckering around the edges? And this discoloration here? Someone tried to remove the printed information using heat. Probably an iron. It melted the outer layer just enough to erase the text without fully destroying the tag. He angled it toward the light. The damage pattern is concentrated where the model number and production code would have been. Natural aging wouldn't do that. Margaret swallowed hard. So, it wasn't an accident? No. This was intentional, Robert said. Deliberate. He paused, tilting his head slightly. If I may ask, why is this bag so important? Margaret glanced at Doris, then answered carefully. It looks identical to one my daughter owned a very long time ago. Robert nodded respectfully. Well, I can confirm it's authentic, an original Mattel item, and altered with care to remove its identifiers. If you need a written evaluation, my wife and I can help. Thank you, Margaret said, her voice shaky with restrained emotion. You've been incredibly helpful. With the bag returned, they thanked both men and hurried back to the car. As soon as the doors shut, the atmosphere shifted. Someone erased that tag, Doris said flatly. Someone didn't want that bag identified. I know, Margaret whispered, staring down at it. We need to go to the police. Detective Reyes has to see this. They had only driven a few blocks before the brake warning light on the dashboard blinked to life. A slow, queasy rumble began under the hood. Margaret tapped the brake, nearly no resistance. That's not right. What is it? Doris asked. The brake pedal. It's soft. We're losing pressure. Just ahead, a red light glowed. Margaret veered gently to the side of the road, heart pounding as she brought the car to a shaky stop. The engine sputtered. This has never happened before, she murmured, popping the hood and stepping out. Steam wasn't rising, but something was definitely wrong. Should we call a tow truck? Doris asked as she joined her. Yeah, I guess we'll have to. Marguerite reached for her phone, but before she could dial, a familiar pickup truck pulled to a stop behind them. It was Reed, and he wasn't alone. A taller, broader man stepped out of the passenger side, his heavy boots crunching on gravel. Margaret? Doris? Reed called out with concern. Everything all right? Margaret forced a smile, every nerve in her body on alert. Car trouble, brakes failed. Reed approached. This is Jason, he said, gesturing to the man beside him. He's good with cars. Jason gave a nod and crouched beside the engine. Looks like your brake line's leaking, and your transmission's been strained. You're lucky you pulled over when you did. Can it be fixed? Margaret asked. Not out here, Jason said. Needs proper equipment. Where were you headed? Reed asked. To the police station, Doris answered tightly, following up on Jim's case. Reed blinked. Police station? Everything all right? We're just following up, Margaret added quickly. Well, Reed said, why don't I call a tow for you? I can get your car brought to the junkyard. We'll fix it up cheap. That's kind of you, but we'd like to go to the police first, Doris cut in. Marguerite hesitated. Mom, maybe we deal with the car first. We can call Detective Reyes from there. Reed nodded. Exactly. No use leaving your car sitting out. Before they could say anything else, Reed was on the phone. They'll be here in 10 minutes, he said when he hung up. The silence afterward was suffocating. Margaret could feel Doris's rising tension beside her. When the tow truck arrived, a different logo, new face, the driver barely said a word as he hooked up the car. All set, Reed said. You ladies can ride with us. Margaret moved toward the truck, but Doris lingered. Her eyes narrowed as she stared at Reed's license plate. You coming? Reed called, already climbing in beside Jason. Yes, of course, Margaret said, but Doris didn't move. Not yet. Something had shifted. Something was off. Mom? Margaret called softly. Doris hesitated, her feet rooted to the spot. But after a long pause, she moved slowly toward the truck. As she climbed into the back seat, she leaned toward Margaret and whispered tightly into her ear. I don't like this. I have a bad feeling. We should have called the police. Margaret gave her hand a reassuring pat, but even as she tried to soothe her mother, a ripple of unease passed through her. Reed's timing, the route change, the silence from Jason. It was all too convenient. Julie. Margaret cleared her throat. Reed, I think we've changed our minds. Could you drop us at the police station instead? We'll handle the car later. Reed glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Sure, he said flatly. But as they drove, Margaret watched the streets turn unfamiliar. The scenery didn't match the route to the police station. She frowned. Reed. This doesn't look right. Shortcut, he said, eyes locked on the road, less traffic. Jason turned around. His smile was gone. His eyes, once light, were cold, predatory. Doris sat up straight. Reed, where are you taking us? She demanded, her voice like steel. Reed's jaw tightened. Change of plans, he said. Margaret felt her heart sink. What do you mean? Before she could finish, Jason reached beneath his seat and pulled out a handgun, fitted with a silencer. In his other hand, 2 pairs of handcuffs. Put these on, he said, voice deadly calm. Now. Margaret froze. Reed, what the hell is this? Jason raised the weapon. Do it, or I'll shoot. The fury in his voice shattered any illusion of safety. With shaking hands, Margaret clamped the cuffs around her wrists. Doris did the same. Jason leaned back and checked the cuffs, then stuffed cloth gags into their mouths. That bag? Jason sneered, reaching over and snatching the blue handbag from Doris's lap. It's not yours anymore. He shoved Margaret roughly to the floor of the truck, forcing Doris to lie sideways on the seat. Reed's eyes met Margaret's in the mirror. Gone was the helpful stranger. What stared back was ice. Be quiet, he warned, or you'll never see daylight again. The truck veered off the main road and onto a dirt path flanked by dense cedar. The city faded behind them. The trees loomed close. Margaret's breath caught. This wasn't just a detour. She turned her head slightly and caught Doris's eyes. Her mother's expression was grim but focused. She mouthed something. I texted someone. Hope flared. The dirt road wound through the trees for miles before opening into a wide, lonely clearing. An old farmhouse with a collapsed porch loomed ahead, its paint peeling and windows dark. Nearby sat a rust-stained camper, its sides dented, one door swinging open in the wind. Reed parked the truck and stepped out, followed by Jason. The 2 men dragged Margaret and Doris from the vehicle. The women stumbled, cuffed and gagged, helpless against the cold dirt and thick air. As they passed the camper, it rocked violently, as if someone inside was in a fit or worse. Reed glanced toward it, smirking. Looks like the boss is getting warmed up. Jason laughed darkly. He's not gonna like this. They marched up the creaking steps of the farmhouse, pushing the women inside. The stench of mildew and stale smoke clung to the walls. In a back room, part office, part prison, an older man sat in a worn armchair reading a newspaper. His hair was gray, his eyes hidden beneath heavy lids. Watch them, Reed barked. We'll be back after the boss is done. Jason removed their gags. No talking, same rules. Reed secured their cuffs to a rusted radiator with thick chain. Then the 2 men disappeared, the door shutting with a hollow bang. Margaret coughed, her voice ragged. Please, help us. We haven't done anything wrong. Doris joined in. My daughter's with the police. Detective Reyes. They'll find us. If you help, it'll go easier on you. The old man didn't respond. He turned a page in his newspaper, but his hands trembled slightly. Margaret tried again, her voice cracking. "We're trying to find my husband and daughter. They vanished 16 years ago. Please." Minutes passed in strained silence. Finally, the door opened again. The old man straightened, visibly tense. She was only him. He stepped closer, his voice barely audible. "Be quiet. They'll hurt you if they hear us." "Please," Doris whispered. "We're not here to cause trouble. My granddaughter's name is Lucia Halbrook. She was just a child when she was taken. Please, if she's here." He hesitated. His eyes scanned the door again. Then his voice came, gravel soft. "They call her Samantha now. That's what they've called her since they changed her name 4 years ago." Margaret's heart stopped. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "She's here? Lucia's here?" He nodded, jaw clenched. "But keep your voice down. Please," Margaret begged. "You don't have to be like them. I can see it. You're not like them." "I can't help you," he said bitterly. "Not without risking everything. You don't know what kind of men they are." "We don't have many years left," Doris said quietly. "But we can still choose how we use them. Please, help us do what's right." The old man looked away. Then, slowly, he exhaled. "For Samantha," he muttered. Then he pulled a cell phone from his coat pocket. With trembling hands, he dialed 911, whispered the address, and hung up before the second ring. Just in time. The door burst open. Reed entered first, followed by Jason and a third man, massive, shirtless, under a stained tank top, arms covered in faded tattoos, eyes devoid of warmth. Margaret's blood turned to ice. "The boss, what are you doing in here, Micah?" the man growled, voice thick and gravelly. "You're not supposed to be talking to the prisoners." Micah didn't answer, but Margareta held her breath, because now someone knew where they were, and that might just be their only chance. Micah froze, taking a wary step back as the towering man they called boss narrowed his eyes. "These women were noisy, brother." "I was just telling them to shut up, that's all," he said quickly, his voice tight with fear. The boss studied him with cold suspicion. "Search him," he barked at Reed and Jason. "And if he's lying, deal with him." Reed didn't flinch. "Yes, boss." With that, Reed and Micah disappeared, leaving Margaret and Doris in the room with Jason and the boss. The massive man approached, his gaze crawling over Margaret in a way that made her skin crawl. "So," he said, his voice dripping with something vile, "Reed tells me you're here looking for Samantha." He reached out and touched a lock of Margaret's hair, then brought it to his nose, inhaling. "I like older women, too." Margaret recoiled, her handcuffs clinking against the radiator. She summoned strength from a place she hadn't known existed. "Give her back," she said through gritted teeth. "She's my daughter." The boss laughed, the sound sickening. "That can't happen. But I'll tell you what we can do." He turned to Jason. "Bring them in." Jason left and returned moments later with 3 women in their 20s, each with similar builds and long brown hair. Heads bowed, they didn't speak. "Here's the game," the boss said, smiling like a predator. "Pick which one is Samantha. No talking, you both point. If you guess right, you can see her. Just see her." Margaret and Doris studied them, desperate. One had a tiny scar above her right eyebrow, the same scar Lucia got when she fell off her bike at 6. Margaret's heart pounded. "Calm, 2, 3, point," the boss commanded. Both women pointed to the girl with the scar. The boss laughed. "Well, I'll be damned. Family really does know." He motioned to the others. "Take them away." Jason ushered out the remaining 2, leaving the scarred young woman behind. "Lucia?" Margaret whispered. "Is it really you, sweetheart?" The young woman didn't look up. Her face was blank, eyes dull. "No," the boss said, voice thick with menace. Samantha, strip. No, Margaret cried. Please don't. Don't do this. Leave her alone, Doris added. But the boss ignored them. Samantha moved mechanically to comply. No resistance, no expression. Wait, the boss grinned. Let's make this interesting. He unlocked Margaret from the radiator, keeping her cuffed. Dragging her to the room's center, he growled, Samantha, stripper. No, Margaret begged. Lucia, it's me, it's Mom. For the briefest moment, Samantha faltered, but she stepped forward. I like to play with my food, the boss sneered, tearing Margaret's blouse at the shoulder. Before he could go further, the door burst open. Boss, police outside, Reed shouted. Chaos exploded. The boss swore, grabbed Lucia's arm. We're going, Reed stammered. There's no way out, they've got us surrounded. Furious, the boss seized Reed's gun and turned it on Margaret. But before he could shoot, Micah dove into the room, shielding her. 2 shots rang out. Micah crumpled, blood pooling. The boss pulled the trigger again. Click. Empty. Damn it, give me another. Suddenly the sound of splintering wood. Please, drop your weapons. Officers stormed the house. Jason and Reith surrendered. The boss lunged. A shot fired. He dropped to his knees, wounded, still laughing. You can't kill me that easy, he wheezed. Another shot silenced him. Handcuffs clinked. Medics swarmed. Margaret, finally free, rushed to Lucia. Lucia, she said, voice trembling. It's me. Mom. Lucia didn't respond. Doris joined, tears flowing. We found her, Margaret. We finally found her. Paramedics worked frantically on Micah, who lay pale and bleeding. Saved us, Margaret whispered. Flashing red and blue lights bathed the farmhouse in chaos. Margaret and Doris held Lucia, unsure what came next. But they knew this. They had her. And whatever scars remained, they would face them together. As paramedics loaded Micah into the waiting ambulance, a young officer approached Margaret and Doris, his expression solemn but kind. The medics want to transport your daughter to the hospital immediately, he explained. She needs evaluation by specialists. They also recommend you both get thoroughly checked out as well. Margaret nodded, her eyes still locked on the ambulance doors closing on Micah. Her voice trembled. That man, Micah. He saved my life. Will he be okay? The officer's answer was calm but non-committal. They're doing everything they can. He's conscious and he's strong. That's a good sign. As they moved toward the second ambulance where Lucia was already waiting, another paramedic joined them. Before we go, there's something you should know, he said. Micah told us a few things during treatment. His name is Micah Carraway. Reed Carraway is his son. Margaret froze. His son? The paramedic nodded gravely. And Reed works for Charlie Carnes, the man in the tank top. Carnes is Micah's stepbrother. Doris's voice cracked. That poor man. His own son turning on him for a monster like that. The paramedic gently urged them forward. The detectives will speak with you at the hospital. Inside the ambulance, Margaret took a seat beside Lucia, who sat upright but completely unresponsive. Her eyes didn't blink, didn't move, just stared through everything and everyone. Margaret reached out tentatively and touched her daughter's hand. Lucia, she whispered, we're here now. There was no reaction, not even a flicker. The drive to the hospital passed in a blur of red and blue lights and sirens. Upon arrival, they were separated. Lucia wheeled away for evaluation. Margaret and Doris taken to another area for their own exams. Once cleared, they were guided to a quiet consultation room. Margaret collapsed into a chair, the weight of the day finally bearing down. I still can't believe we found her, she whispered, the words as much for herself as anyone else. I know, Doris murmured, sitting beside her. It's a miracle. But she's been through hell. That man. Charlie Carnes. Margaret shut her eyes, trying to block out the memory of what they had seen. After several minutes of silence, Detective Reyes entered the room. Mrs. Holbrook. Mrs. Barrett. I'm relieved to see you're safe. Today has been intense for all of us. Have you spoken with my daughter? Margaret asked immediately. Reyes shook her head. The doctors are still evaluating her. Physically, she's unharmed, but they're worried about trauma. And Micah? Doris asked. He's in surgery. The bullets missed anything vital. The doctors are optimistic. And those men, Reed and Carnes? Margaret asked, a steel edge in her voice. They're in custody. We've secured the blue handbag as evidence. We're investigating the junkyard owner as well. See if he's connected to any of this. Did Reed or Jason say anything about Jim? Or Lucia? Doris pressed. Reyes took a deep breath. We're piecing it together, but we know this. Charlie Carnes is a wanted serial predator. He's moved through various states under aliases for years. He manipulates, exploits, and controls. Margaret clenched her fists. Reed has been cooperative. Reyes continued. He says he was only 10 at the time. Charlie was his step-uncle. Micah, Reed's father, was poor and passive, someone Reed saw as weak. Charlie seemed powerful. Reed idolized him. The detective's voice lowered. They were near Marble Falls when they saw Jim's red Cadillac. They posed as stranded travelers. Jim, ever kind, offered them a ride. Charlie claimed Reed was his son and sick. Jim even paid for an extra motel room for them. That night, Charlie drugged Jim's drink. Once Lucia was asleep, he strangled Jim in the motel bathroom. Margaret gasped, tears pouring freely. Charlie told Lucia her father was sick, taken to a hospital. He drove her away, changed her name, and moved constantly. He told her her mother was dead. Over time, he rewrote her world. And my husband's body? Margaret choked. Reed and Jason stayed behind to clean the scene. They dumped Jim's body in a sinkhole and hid the Cadillac in a forest. Just last week, Reed moved the car to the junkyard, planning to destroy it. He believed enough time had passed. Silence filled the room. Margaret sat, hollowed out by the story, the missing pieces of her life laid bare. We will try to recover your husband's remains, Reyes added gently. Before Margaret could respond, a doctor entered. Mrs. Holbrook, Mrs. Barrett, your daughter has been moved to a private room. She's stable but silent. We think your presence could help. They followed the doctor through quiet hallways to Lucia's room. She lay there, still staring blankly. Margaret approached slowly. Lucia, she whispered, taking her hand. It's Mom. Grandma Doris is here too. She and Doris took turns speaking gently. Stories from childhood, loving reassurances. Minutes turned into an hour. Then finally Lucia whispered, I'm sorry for being so broken. Margaret crumbled. Sweetheart, none of this was your fault. We're here now. That's what matters. I miss Daddy, Lucia said, tears welling. The little voice of that 8-year-old was still inside her, frozen in time. I miss him too, Margaret whispered, stroking her hair. A nurse appeared at the door. Excuse me, Mr. Carraway is asking for you. Margaret glanced at Lucia, hesitant. Doris touched her arm. Go. I'll see. Margaret entered the adjacent room where Micah lay, pale but alert. His voice was weak. Mrs. Holbrook, I'm so sorry for everything. Margaret sat by his bedside. You saved us. You saved Lucia. There's nothing to forgive. Micah's eyes welled. My son. He hated gentleness. He saw kindness as weakness. When Jim stopped to help, Charlie knew he was prey. Margaret nodded solemnly. But you chose differently. She squeezed his hand, leaving him to rest. Back in Lucia's room, her daughter was asleep. Doris sat nearby, watching over her. Margaret sat on the other side and took Lucia's hand again. 16 years of searching, hoping, and hurting had brought them to this moment. The healing would take time, but they had time now. She watched her daughter sleep, silently thanking whatever twist of fate had led them to that junkyard, to the crushed red Cadillac, to the blue handbag that had finally, miraculously, brought her daughter home.